Hey, I'm back to making videos. Took a time out to finish my book, but now that's done. The problem is, I need to do some research before I make more of my deep diving videos, and this will take more time. So, in the meantime, I thought I would make some short reaction videos. A bit of old school Serpent. Before we start, I should mention that some of you did not buy my book yet. Is that how you respect the months I slaved writing it? Do you want me to lose faith in myself and stop making videos? I want you to pause the video now, scroll down, click the link, and buy the book, or I will bite you. Now that you bought it, we can get to the video at hand. Today, we will be talking about a hot topic at the moment, democracy. And we shall do it by reacting to a pretty old video, from a channel that needs to get its ass kicked. Yes, The School of Life, a channel that has over 6 million subscribers. It's a philosophy channel, created by the philosopher Alain de Botton. Seems that there are a few writers behind the channel, so I will refer to it as they. The School of Life makes mainly self-help videos, but occasionally it does so by relying on the writing of a philosopher. It takes some of his ideas, chops them up, mixes them up a bit, peppers in some commentary, and serves it as a kind of new agey advice for life. Now, I don't object to that. There's nothing wrong with using philosophy in this populist manner, if that's what you want to do. What I don't like is that in every video that I've watched, they grossly misrepresent the philosopher that they talk about. Nowadays we say that every text has several interpretations, so no one can claim to have the correct reading of a text. Certainly not a philosophical text. I agree with this assertion. However, there are readings that are better than others. You can rate them. And if I am to rate the video that I am about to react to, I would say that it is a disgrace. The video is titled, Why Socrates Hated Democracy. It was made 4 years ago, shortly after Donald Trump got elected. And it's not a coincidence. Now that the US had another presidential election, and the Trump era is over, it's a good time to react to it.
We're used to thinking very highly of democracy, and by extension of ancient Athens, the civilization that gave rise to it. The Parthenon has become almost a byword for democratic values, which is why so many leaders of democracies like to be photographed there. It's therefore very striking to discover that one of ancient Greece's greatest achievements, philosophy, was highly suspicious of its other achievement, democracy. The founding father of Greek philosophy, Socrates, is portrayed in the dialogues of Plato as hugely pessimistic about the whole business of democracy. In Book 6 of the Republic,
Boom! Here we go. Anyone who knows even a little bit philosophy knows that Socrates of the Republic is not the historical Socrates. The School of Life makes it seem like he is, and I will soon explain why this is inexcusable. For those who are not familiar, Socrates lived in Athens in the 5th century BC. He was not the founding father of Greek philosophy, but he is one of the most important philosophers ever. He is famous mainly for having philosophical debates with other thinkers, who came from all over Greece to lecture in Athens, but he never wrote anything. After his death, his student Plato started writing dialogues, in which Socrates is usually the main figure. Some of these dialogues, the earlier ones, are considered true to the historical Socrates, and to the debates that he had. In others, Plato is using Socrates as a literary figure, to present his own ideas. Now, the historical Socrates, as presented by Plato and others, did not hate democracy. He loved democracy. He loved it so much that he became a martyr for it. Following the defeat of Athens to Sparta in the Peloponnesian War, the Spartans set a tyrannical government in Athens, headed by some of Socrates' former students. This government was so bad that it quickly fell victim to a coup, and democracy was restored. Socrates was then blamed, unjustifiably, that he corrupted the youth and made it ally with Sparta. It was put to a vote, and he was found guilty and sentenced to death. A rich friend then arranged for his escape, but Socrates refused to go. He reasoned that he believed in Athenian democracy all his life, so he must abide by it even when it makes bad decisions. To escape would be to invalidate democracy, and he would rather die than do that. Already we see what a travesty it is to make the claim that Socrates hated democracy, the claim that School of Life is making. But the real culprit here is Plato, who unscrupulously used the character of Socrates to argue against democracy. We are talking about the dialogue Politeia, in which Plato presents his view on what the ideal polis, the city-state, should be like. In the English language, the dialogue is called the Republic, which is a terrible translation. It appears Enlightenment philosophers were so enamored by Plato's other ideas that they refused to see his political thought for what it is, and this is why they called it that. The police state would have been a much better translation. There are no two ways about it, and I am not going to mince words. Plato's idea of the perfect state is a state that is 10 times worse than Nazi Germany. It is a totalitarian, racist, oppressive state, which divides its citizens into classes, keeps most of the population completely uneducated and in servitude, does not allow any upward mobility, censors most of the arts, and bans freedom of thought. And this idea had a harmful effect on Western history. Those who refuse to admit it are acting just like those religious people who refuse to admit that their holy scriptures contain bad ideas that can lead to bad deeds. This is arguably the biggest diversion Plato made from the teachings of his master. Socrates believed that he doesn't know the truth, and neither does anyone else. He encouraged his students to reject dogma, think for themselves, and seek truth. Furthermore, he believed that every human is capable of thinking for themselves, and should be prodded to do so. He wanted to live in a democracy in which everyone is free and their voice counts. Plato, on the other hand, believed that only people born to a certain class are capable of thinking philosophical thought, and that among those, there are some who are capable of seeing the absolute truth. Those include himself, obviously. And he argued that the knowing ones should be the rulers of the state, and that everyone else should blindly submit to their authority. So, for the rest of the video, while School of Life will disgustingly attribute these views to Socrates, we shall correctly attribute them to Plato.
In Book 6 of the Republic, Plato describes Socrates falling into conversation with a character called Adimantus and trying to get him to see the flaws of democracy by comparing a society to a ship. If you were heading out on a journey by sea, asks Socrates, who would you ideally want deciding who was in charge of the vessel? Just anyone, or people educated in the rules and demands of seafaring? The latter, of course, says Adimantus. So why then, responds Socrates, do we keep thinking that any old person should be fit to judge who should be the ruler of a country? Socrates' point is that voting in an election is a skill, not a random intuition. And like any skill, it needs to be taught systematically to people.
What skill does it take? The seafarer does indeed need to know his profession, as do any other workers in professions that demand expertise. Let's talk about the doctor. The doctor doesn't know everything about illnesses and about what causes them, but they know a lot more than the rest of us. So we can refer to the doctor as the knowing one when it comes to our health, and we rely on their guidance. When it comes to the question of how to run a state, on the other hand, nobody is the knowing one. There are too many variables, too many changes, too many random elements involved. Nobody knows for sure what the best policy should be at any given moment. A cab driver with 5 years of school often has more political wisdom than a professor of political science. So this analogy by Plato is a bad and misleading analogy.
Letting the citizenry vote without an education is as irresponsible as putting them in charge of a trireme sailing to Samos in a storm. Socrates was to have first-hand catastrophic experience of the foolishness of voters. In 399 BC, the philosopher was put on trial on trumped-up charges of corrupting the youth of Athens. A jury of 500 Athenians was invited to weigh up the case and decided by a narrow margin that the philosopher was guilty. He was put to death by hemlock in a process which is for thinking people every bit as tragic as Jesus' condemnation has been for Christians.
Indeed it is. So why are you spitting on his memory?
Crucially, Socrates was not elitist in the normal sense.
No, Socrates was not elitist in any sense. What you are about to describe is the thought of Plato, and he was an elitist in every sense. The Politeia is his utopian vision, but even if we go down to the level of his realistic politics, Plato's preferred system was aristocracy.
He didn't believe that a narrow few should only ever vote. He did, however, insist that only those who had thought about issues rationally and deeply should be let near a vote. We have forgotten this distinction between an intellectual democracy and a democracy by birthright. We have given the vote to all without connecting it to wisdom.
And here, School of Life exposes its own hatred for democracy. There is no such distinction between intellectual democracy and the democracy by birthright. What you are talking about is aristocracy, where only those who have the money to achieve a certain level of knowledge should be allowed to vote. What we have here, then, is an attack on democracy in the guise of an educational video about Greek philosophy. Because of that, I shall expand the scope of this video. My aim is no longer just to set the record straight about Socrates, but also to defend democracy. So, apparently, only intellectuals should be allowed to vote. So if someone is a farmer, busy in growing crops and livestock and doesn't care much about political issues, they should not be part of the democratic process. This way, we will elect the best government. This is the opinion that School of Life here ascribes to Socrates. Let me ask you this, then. What is a good government? I actually agree with Plato here. It is a government that achieves the maximum well-being for its entire population. Now, who knows better what makes our farmer happy? Is it some intellectual who studied agriculture in the university? Or is it the farmer? It is the farmer, so his vote should count as well. In opposition, you might claim that the expert who studied agriculture knows better what will make the farmer happy in the long run. In the same way that the doctor gives you treatment that causes you to suffer for the moment what makes you healthier in the long run, so does the agriculture expert know how to maximize productivity in a way that will make all the farmers richer. That may be so, but riches is not the only thing that accounts for one's well-being and happiness. Humans have many different concerns, and no expert can be aware of all of them. We need to hear from the farmers as well. We need a democracy in which everyone has a voice, and which reaches decisions based on the combination of all these voices. In short, we should rely on the wisdom of the crowd. Again, that does not pertain to everything. When it comes to your personal health, it is obviously better to consult a doctor than put it to a vote. Even then, several doctors are better than one. When it comes to running a state, the wisdom of the entire nation is superior to that of any man.
And Socrates knew exactly where that would lead, to a system the Greeks feared above all, demagoguery. Ancient Athens had painful experience of demagogues. For example, the louche figure of Alcibiades, a rich, charismatic, smooth-talking, wealthy man who eroded basic freedoms and helped to push Athens to its disastrous military adventures in Sicily.
A rich, charismatic, smooth-talking, wealthy man. I wonder if they have someone else in mind.
Socrates knew how easily people seeking election could exploit our desire for easy answers.
Aha. So basically, what we have here is a video made by elitists who were so distressed by Donald Trump's election that they gave up on democracy, and now they are pushing for aristocracy, in which those dumb peasants would not be able to vote, and only the clever and educated people like ourselves will have the vote. But they couldn't just come out and say it, so they had to rely on the authority of a renowned philosopher. Plato was most suitable, but too many people know that Plato was anti-democratic, and School of Life wanted to pretend that they are merely offering a way to improve democracy. So they deceived their audience into thinking that Socrates, that well-known lover of democracy, is the one promoting these ideas. It's not that he hates democracy, you see, only a certain kind of democracy. Our kind. They also hasten to add that Socrates was a hero who died for free thought, so we are driven to think that these ideas that they put in his mouth must be compatible with democracy. Yes, when you allow everyone to speak, there is danger that the masses will fall under the charm of demagogues. The Greeks warned us that this is one of the dangers of democracy. But we have heeded their warnings, and today's democracy is more robust than that of ancient Athens, and has checks and balances to prevent populist demagogues from completely taking over and establishing a tyranny. There is no basis nowadays to believe that an aristocracy would prevent the rise of tyrants any better than a democracy. Take the recent US elections. Everything was stacked up against the American democracy. The nation is polarized, violent agitator groups are exploiting it, trust in the authorities is at an all-time low, a populist was in power, and the pandemic required a voting process that can easily be suspected of manipulation. I was seriously fearing a bloodbath. Instead, what we got is this.
Now, we could fight him with conventional weapons. That could take years and cost millions of lives. No. No, in this case, I think we have to go all out. I think this situation absolutely requires a really futile and stupid gesture be done on somebody's part.
We're just the guys to do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it!
Of course, the wisdom of the crowd doesn't always work. It can make mistakes, even execute people like Socrates. Let's say that the election of Trump was a mistake. The thing is, we have no way of knowing that for sure, since we don't know what would have happened if he lost. But let's hypothesize that things would have been better today if Clinton would have been the president in the past 4 years. It is still better this way than if Clinton would have been elected by an aristocracy. Because the fact that Trump won means that he represented the American spirit at the time, a spirit that wanted him and not Hillary. He represented something that the American people needed to check out, and now that they did, they became wiser by the experience. It may not feel like it right now, with emotions around his recent loss running high, but in time people will calm down and come to rational conclusions. As a result, America will become stronger. This is what gives democracy its power. Not the policies of the government, but the strength of the nation. You might object to this, and claim that I am playing with people's lives. Maybe it's true that in the long run America will become stronger by this, but in the here and now Trump's policies hurt people. This objection would hold if we knew for sure that things would have been better under Hillary, but we don't know that, do we? So the best thing to do is to give everyone the vote, and allow the body politique to make mistakes and learn from them. Speaking of demagoguery, let's go back to the School of Life video.
He asked us to imagine an election debate between two candidates, one who was like a doctor and the other who was like a sweet shop owner. The sweet shop owner would say of his rival, "Look, this person here has worked many evils on you. He hurts you, gives you bitter potions, and tells you not to eat and drink whatever you like. He'll never serve you feasts of many and varied pleasant things like I will." Socrates asks us to consider the audience's response. Do you think the doctor would be able to reply effectively? The true answer, "I cause you trouble and go against your desires in order to help you," would cause an uproar among the voters, don't you think?
No, I don't think. The masses are not as dumb as Plato thinks they are. They may fall for some magical solutions, but then they learn from their mistake and don't fall for it again. This is how democracy became so robust and stable. The body politique learned from its errors. Unfortunately, Plato's elitist thinking is still prevalent in our culture. We have this conception that the masses are dumb, so we need to give the elite more power. If you take this allegory of the doctor and the sweet shop owner and apply it to today's America, you will realize that this is exactly what both sides of the political debate believe. They both believe that most people, especially those on the other side, are following sweet shop owners. The left believes that right-wingers are awash with religious superstition and mindlessly accepting political propaganda paid for by billionaires who want to maintain their power, so they are convinced to vote against their self-interests. The right believes that left-wingers have no core values, and are therefore easily manipulated by ideas pushed forth by the academy and the entertainment industry, and vote to give more power to the government instead of to themselves. Meanwhile, if you actually talk to voters, you realize that while they are ignorant about some aspects of how the country is being run, they do spend time thinking and learning about the aspects that matter to them, and vote according to that. In other words, we are all being elitist, while thinking that we are anti-elitist. And the upshot is that we are giving more power to the elite. We want the good elites to save us from the bad elites. The American right believe that the elites, what they call the cathedral, are a swamp, so they give power to a billionaire to drain the swamp. The American left believe that the elites, a military-industrial complex made of white people, are a monopoly that wants to preserve its power by pushing nationalistic and bigoted views. So they pressure the academy, the media, and the high-tech companies to censor such views, and thus give these bodies even more power. As a result, America ends up looking more and more like an aristocracy.
We have forgotten all about Socrates' salient warnings against democracy. We have preferred to think of democracy as an unambiguous good rather than as something that is only ever as effective as the education system that surrounds it.
Right, we should put more people into universities, so they can learn how to turn philosophy into fast food, and twist the words of philosophers to promote anti-democratic views. I'm going to be generous to School of Life and assume that they are not trying to convince us that we should give up on our democracy, but merely call on us to improve our educational system. But what does that mean? Maybe they want everyone to learn political thought. But then who will be the farmers, the plumbers, and the retailers? Are you saying we don't need them? Or maybe they mean that we should teach people how to beware of those who promise us candy instead of medicine. That would make sense if there were actually those among us who could tell for sure between candy and medicine in the political field. But, as I pointed out in the beginning, when it comes to the question of how to run a country, no one is the knowing one.
As a result, we have elected many sweet shop owners and very few doctors.
No, we've elected politicians. And politicians are usually not brilliant. But it doesn't matter. In a democracy, the sovereign is not the government, but the people. So the wisdom of the politicians matters less than the wisdom of the people. The great thing about a democratic political process is that it makes the body politique, the combination of all citizens of the country, wiser over time. American democracy is broken at the moment. Both sides believe that the other side is un-American and undemocratic. They both blame each other for trying to steal the elections. This is the result of giving too much significance to the question who is elected. Every time the Americans have elections, they say that these are the most important elections of their lifetime, and the fate of the country hangs in the balance. There's this silly notion that if they elect the right people, things can get fixed, and electing the wrong people will make things irrevocably broken. In fact, it doesn't matter much who gets elected. Looking back, we realize that American society is a society that is very good at fixing its problems, and not thanks to its politicians. It is thanks to its democracy that allows for free expression, innovation, dialogue, and debate. Most of the process takes place outside of the political sphere. But the breakdown of American politics is now threatening this cultural dialogue. It's not only America, of course. Democracy is struggling all over the world. How do we get out of it? Well, I believe liberal democracy will once again fix itself. And, as always, it will happen on ground level, not thanks to anything the government does. If you want to know more about it, buy my book. Marshall McLuhan once wrote that Plato wanted to form the perfect academy, not realizing that he was already living in the perfect academy. Socrates understood it. He knew that Athens, the city-state in which he could have conversations with philosophers, artists, and laymen, is the perfect breeding ground for ideas and insights. He never left the city, never traveled elsewhere, not even when his life depended on it. Plato, in his elitism, went out of the city walls and formed the school which he called academia. This is actually the origin of the word, believing that there, among other upper-class philosophers, he could dwell in the kingdom of truth. School of Life seems to have the same elitist approach. How ironic, then, that what we remember from Plato is not his academia. Aristotle studied there for a while, but not much else is left from the school that stood for 3 centuries. What we do remember from Plato, this hater of democracy, is his dialogues, in which Athenian democracy comes to life in all its glory. The Athens in which Socrates talks to people of all walks of life, and has debates with those who think differently from him, still sparkles thanks to Plato's brilliant literary talent. It is this side of Plato that is worth preserving.